He fixed things nobody noticed, until the day the CEO noticed him. She ran a company of 2,000 people. She'd never once stopped to watch someone fix a light switch. Until now. Nobody at that office knew what waited for him at home. A little girl who made every long shift worth it. See?
You got it, yes.
He came to fix the lights for her gala. He never expected to be handed a seat at her table. Careful, people might think we're together. Would that be so bad?
If you have ever believed that the person running the show and the person fixing what smiled could never end up on equal footing, this story is about to change your mind. Stay with it until the end, because what starts as a broken light fixture turns into something neither of them saw coming. And if stories about quiet connection and unexpected love keep you watching, go ahead and hit like and subscribe right now, because this journey is worth every minute. Marcus Reyes had worked in facilities maintenance at Hale Innovations for almost 4 years, ever since his wife Camille passed away from a car accident that left him a single father to their daughter Sophie, then only 2 years old. Grief had reshaped his life into something smaller and more careful. He no longer chased the kind of ambitious career path he once imagined for himself. He simply needed steady, reliable work that let him pick Sophie up from daycare on time and be present for the small, ordinary moments that grief had taught him never to take for granted. Facilities work suited that need perfectly. He knew every flickering light, every stubborn thermostat, every quirky elevator button on all 14 floors of the building, and he moved through his days with the quiet competence of a man who found dignity in doing his job well, even if most of the people he served day to day never learned his name. Victoria Hale had built Hale Innovations from a modest software startup into a company worth hundreds of millions, and she had done it largely alone. She had taken over from her father after his sudden retirement due to health concerns 8 years earlier, inheriting not just a company, but an entire culture of skepticism about whether a 30-year-old woman could steer a serious tech firm through an increasingly competitive market. She had proven herself, relentlessly, methodically, at the cost of nearly everything else in her personal life. Her marriage had ended 3 years into her tenure as CEO, largely because there had been little room left in her schedule for a husband who wanted more of her time than the company allowed. Since then, Victoria had thrown herself entirely into work, becoming known throughout the industry as brilliant, formidable, and almost entirely unreachable on any personal level. Employees respected her. Very few felt they actually knew her. The two of them existed, for years, in entirely separate orbits within the same building. Victoria occupied the top floor, glass-walled and quiet, while Marcus moved through boiler rooms and electrical closets on the floors below. Their paths crossed occasionally, briefly, the way paths do in a large office building. A nod in the elevator, a polite word exchanged near the mailroom. Neither expected that to change. It began, unremarkably, with a flickering light. The recessed lighting outside Victoria's office had developed an intermittent flicker that IT and building management had failed to resolve for nearly 2 weeks, an ongoing irritation Victoria had mentioned only once, in passing, to her assistant, assuming it would eventually sort itself out, the way small annoyances in a busy life often do. It did not sort itself out. Eventually the request landed, as most such requests did, on Marcus's afternoon schedule. He arrived at her floor a little after 4, expecting an empty hallway, and instead found Victoria herself standing near the flickering fixture, arms crossed, visibly irritated by its persistent buzzing hum. She looked up as he approached with his toolbox, and for a moment neither of them quite knew what to say. The CEO of the company and the man responsible for keeping its lights on, meeting properly for what felt like the first time despite years of shared proximity. "You must be here for my very dramatic lighting crisis," Victoria said dryly, gesturing at the ceiling. Marcus allowed himself a small smile, setting down his toolbox. "Word of the flicker has reached even the boiler room, Ms. Hale. I hear it's been terrorizing the 14th floor for 2 weeks. Nearly took out my sanity along with it," she replied, and something in her tone, wry and unexpectedly warm, caught Marcus off guard. He had expected, based on the reputation that preceded her, someone colder. He worked efficiently, climbing a small ladder to access the fixture's wiring, while Victoria, to his mild surprise, did not simply retreat into her office and leave him to it, as most executives would have. She lingered, leaning against the wall a few feet away, watching him work with what appeared to be genuine curiosity, rather than impatience. "Do you like this kind of work?" she asked eventually. Marcus considered the question honestly, rather than offering the polite deflection he might have given a stranger. "I do, actually. There's something satisfying about fixing something that's broken. Clear problem, clear solution. Not a lot of ambiguity in a faulty wire." "Unlike running a company," Victoria said, a faint, self-deprecating edge to her voice. "I imagine there's not a lot of clear solutions in your line of work." Marcus agreed, glancing down at her briefly, before returning his attention to the wiring. "Not many," she admitted. "Most days it feels like fixing one flickering light, only to find 3 more waiting behind it." He had the fixture repaired within 20 minutes, the buzzing hum silenced, the light steady, and even for the first time in 2 weeks. Victoria thanked him with more genuine warmth than the situation strictly required, and Marcus gathered his tools and returned to his usual rounds, assuming the brief, pleasant exchange would be the end of it. It was not the end of it. Over the following weeks, small interactions accumulated between them, in a way neither had planned or expected. Victoria began noticing Marcus's schedule, timing her coffee breaks to coincide loosely with his rounds through the break room. Marcus, for his part, found himself unexpectedly looking forward to these brief exchanges. A few minutes of easy conversation that felt entirely unlike the careful, guarded interactions he usually had with people above him in the company hierarchy. Victoria asked about his daughter one afternoon, having noticed a small dinosaur drawing taped inside his toolbox lid, and Marcus found himself telling her, briefly and without the usual weight of grief attached, about Sophie's obsession with dinosaurs, and her insistence on naming every stuffed animal in her room after a different species. "She sounds wonderful," Victoria said, and something in her expression, a flicker of genuine, unguarded warmth, made Marcus wonder, not for the first time, what exactly was hiding behind the composed, formidable exterior the rest of the company saw. Victoria, meanwhile, found herself confiding things to Marcus she rarely mentioned to anyone within the companies. See walls, the exhaustion of a decade spent proving herself, the quiet loneliness of a life built almost entirely around work, the strange, persistent sense that she had succeeded at everything except the parts of life that were supposed to matter most. Marcus listened without the careful calculation she usually detected in conversations with employees eager to impress her or extract something from her attention. He simply listened, the way a person listens to someone they genuinely find interesting, nothing more calculated than that. The dynamic between them shifted slowly, almost imperceptibly, until it became something neither of them could entirely deny, though both were careful, for entirely different reasons, not to name it directly. Marcus was acutely aware of the gap in their positions, wary of anything that might complicate his stable, carefully constructed life, or put his job, and by extension Sophie's stability, at risk. Victoria was aware of the optics, the potential scrutiny from a board that already watched her, decisions with the particular skepticism reserved for a young woman who had inherited rather than built her position from scratch, at least in some of their eyes. Things came to a head, unexpectedly, around the company's 10th anniversary gala, an elaborate rooftop event Victoria's team had spent months planning. Marcus had been assigned to oversee the technical setup for the evening, ensuring the string lights, sound system, and temporary staging held up through the event. He arrived early that afternoon in his work uniform, expecting a straightforward technical job, and was midway through testing the lighting rig when Victoria found him on the rooftop terrace. "I need a favor," she said without preamble, holding out a small card. Marcus took it, confused, and found himself looking at an event badge reading, "Executive Guest," his own name printed neatly beneath the title. "My original +1 canceled this morning," Victoria explained, a slight, uncharacteristic awkwardness in her voice. "A last-minute family emergency. Nothing serious, but it leaves me without an escort for an evening full of investors who love nothing more than speculating about my personal life when I show up alone. I understand if this isn't something you're comfortable with, but you're the only person in this building I'd actually want to spend the evening with instead of enduring it. Marcus stared at the badge for a long moment, several concerns crowding his mind at once: the impropriety of it, the risk to his position, the simple practical matter of not owning anything remotely appropriate to wear to a black-tie rooftop gala. But beneath those concerns sat something quieter and more honest: the simple fact that he wanted to say yes. He borrowed a suit from his neighbor, an ill-fitting charcoal jacket that Victoria's assistant discreetly had tailored within the hour once she learned of the arrangement. And by the time the gala began that evening, Marcus found himself standing on the same rooftop terrace he had wired hours earlier, now transformed by golden string lights and a swirl of well-dressed guests, feeling entirely out of place and yet strangely steady, because Victoria stayed close beside him throughout the evening, introducing him simply as a friend to the various investors and board members who approached, deflecting further questions with practiced ease. The evening unfolded more easily than Marcus expected. Victoria, freed briefly from the constant performance of composed authority, seemed lighter, laughing more easily, teasing him gently about his unfamiliarity with the elaborate menu of hors d'oeuvres circulating on silver trays. Marcus found himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, simply enjoying an evening without the weight of grief or exhaustion pressing down on him. It was near the end of the night, the crowd thinning, the string lights glowing warm against the darkening sky, that they found themselves standing together near the terrace railing, slightly apart from the remaining guests. A photographer hired for the event lingered nearby, capturing candid shots of the evening's remaining highlights, and more than once his lens had drifted toward the two of them, standing close together in comfortable, easy conversation. "People are going to talk, you know," Marcus said, glancing toward the photographer with a faint, amused smile. "Careful, people might start thinking we're together." Victoria turned to look at him fully, the string lights catching the edges of her expression, something unguarded and deliberate settling over her features as she considered his words. "Would that be so bad?" she asked quietly. The question hung between them, weightier than its simple phrasing suggested, and Marcus found himself without a ready deflection for the first time all evening. He studied her for a long moment, searching for any sign that the question was simply playful deflection, and finding instead something entirely sincere. "No," he said finally, his voice quieter than he intended. "It wouldn't be bad at all." What followed in the weeks after the gala was neither simple nor entirely smooth. Word of Marcus's appearance at the gala spread through the company with the particular speed reserved for anything involving the CEO's personal life, and the reaction was mixed. Some employees found it charming, a rare glimpse of humanity, from a woman most had only ever seen as formidably composed. Others, particularly among the more conservative members of the board, expressed pointed concern about the appearance of impropriety, the optics of a CEO pursuing a relationship with an employee several pay grades below her, the potential complications for company culture and perceived fairness. Victoria faced this scrutiny directly, calling an unusual, candid meeting with the board, in which she addressed the speculation without evasion. She acknowledged the personal relationship developing between herself and Marcus, emphasized that he reported through an entirely separate department with no overlap in her direct authority over his employment, and offered, if the board felt it necessary, to formalize an arrangement that removed any possible conflict of interest, including restructuring Marcus's reporting line entirely outside her purview. Her directness, rather than fueling further scrutiny, largely diffused it. The board, accustomed to Victoria's careful, deliberate handling of company matters, found little room to object to a situation she had already addressed with more transparency than most executives would have offered. Marcus faced his own version of this scrutiny, a quieter, more personal reckoning. He worried, more than once, about what it would mean for Sophie if this relationship became a permanent part of their lives, about the adjustment of introducing his daughter to someone new, after years of it being just the two of them, about whether the vast difference in their circumstances would eventually create distance he could not bridge. He raised these concerns directly with Victoria one evening at his apartment, Sophie already asleep in the next room, the modest kitchen a world away from the glass-walled boardrooms Victoria usually occupied. "I don't want Sophie hurt by any of this," he said honestly. "If this doesn't work, if it becomes too complicated, I need to know you understand what's at stake for her, not just for me." Victoria listened without defensiveness, her expression serious and attentive in a way that reassured him more than any reassurance she could have offered in words alone. "I understand," she said finally. "I'm not asking you to risk anything without meaning it seriously. I've spent a decade building a life that looked successful from the outside and felt hollow from the inside. I'm not interested in adding complication to your life for the sake of something casual. If I'm asking for this, it's because I mean it." Their relationship deepened gradually after that, deliberately paced around Sophie's comfort and adjustment, rather than the urgency that might have governed a less careful courtship. Victoria met Sophie for the first time several weeks later, not through any grand introduction, but through a simple Saturday afternoon at the park. Arriving in casual clothes Marcus had genuinely never seen her wear before, jeans and a plain sweater, looking, for the first time since he had known her, entirely unguarded. Sophie, predictably unbothered by any of the complicated adult context surrounding the introduction, immediately demanded that Victoria admire her extensive collection of dinosaur facts, a demand Victoria met with genuine, delighted engagement that surprised even Marcus, who had begun to suspect, correctly, that Victoria's composed public persona concealed a warmth she rarely had the opportunity to express. Over the following months, the relationship settled into something steady and increasingly integrated into both their lives. Victoria began leaving the office earlier some evenings, a change her assistant noted with quiet approval, having watched her employer's relentless schedule for years with growing concern. Marcus found himself, for the first time since Camille's death, imagining a future that included someone beyond himself and Sophie, cautiously, deliberately, but genuinely. The company itself adjusted to the new normal, with less friction than either had anticipated. Victoria's continued transparency about the relationship, combined with her unwavering performance as CEO, gradually dissolved most of the early skepticism. If anything, several employees later admitted that Victoria's visible happiness had made her a more approachable, more genuinely respected leader than her previously all-business persona had allowed. Nearly a year after that first flickering light brought them together, Victoria stood again on the same rooftop terrace, now transformed for the company's 11th anniversary gala, watching Marcus adjust a string of lights with the same easy competence he had shown that very first afternoon. Sophie sat nearby at a small table, coloring quietly, having been welcomed into the evening's early hours before her bedtime, an arrangement that would have seemed unthinkable at the formal, guarded events of years past. When Marcus finished his work and joined her at the railing, the city skyline glittering below them, Victoria found herself smiling at the quiet symmetry of it, remembering the question she had asked him a year earlier, the answer that had changed the careful, separate trajectories of both their lives. "Careful," Marcus murmured, echoing his own words from a year before, a teasing warmth in his voice. "People might think we're together." Victoria turned to him, the same deliberate smile from that first night settling over her features. "Good," she said simply. "Let them think it. It happens to be true. If there's one thing this story leaves you with, let it be this. The most meaningful connections rarely announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they begin with something as small as a flickering light, patiently, quietly fixed by someone willing to notice what everyone else overlooked. If this story resonated with you, remember to like this video and subscribe for more stories about quiet connection and unexpected love, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that the right person is often closer than you think.